Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Sammamish regular meeting for Tuesday, March 18th. And if the clerk would please handle the roll call.
Mayor Karen Howe.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roshino Farrell.
Here.
Councilmember Kaylee Clark.
Here.
If Councilmember Stewart would please do the Pledge of Allegiance in her special way.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And if Councilmember Treen could do the landed law acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mayor. We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the coastal Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will move next to public comment. And I just want to make sure that people are clear that which sheet they might have signed up on, because there's two different sheets there. One's for the public hearing and one's for public comment. So, yeah, because the public hearing will relate specifically to the utility tax. Thank you very much. Salyabu.
Amish, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Good evening. I've come before you several times about the illegal and discriminatory actions of the city manager, Scott McCall, toward me and my former colleague when we served as your communications team. In May 2022, my colleague and I went to HR about Mr. McCall. We described how he created a toxic and hostile work environment for his 100% women of color communications team. In July, my colleague resigned. In August, Mr. McCall put me on an unpaid 2-week suspension and made my return to work contingent on signing an egregious last chance agreement. Why? Because I asked for help. Former Mayor Don Gerrand, on a public Facebook group discussing an article from the Sammamish Independent, called for my termination. The article was about the malicious lawsuits filed by Ms. Sarah House-Kimsey and Ms. Kate Langsdorf, who both made false allegations about me. So, as a public servant and a journalist, I was very concerned about how this defamation would impact my ability to serve the community. So I wrote 2 emails to Mr. McCall and included City Attorney Carrie Sands asking for their assistance. At the same time, I responded to a query from the Sammamish Independent about this First Amendment lawsuit. I was doing my job of press relations when I replied that I couldn't comment on the case, but could point them toward the publicly available court records that held the facts of the case. And what were the facts of the case? That I didn't violate Ms. Sarah Howe-Kimsey's First Amendment rights. I didn't delete or hide her comments on the City of Sammamish's Facebook page. Instead of helping me, Mr. McCall put me on an unpaid 2-week suspension because I replied to the Sammamish Independent's query. He penalized me for doing my job. He denied my request for a hearing, which is mandated in the employee manual. Why was he afraid of the communications team supplying links to court documents to the Sammamish Independent? The defamatory attacks and calls for my termination continued with ferocity by a Sammamish Independent board member, former councilman Jason Ritchie. He even publicly threatened my future employment prospects. Was there collusion between the city and the Sammamish Independent? Ms. Kinsey and her co-conspirators are aligned with the Sammamish Independent. Is that why the Sammamish Independent continually refuses to update the articles they wrote about this lawsuit with the truth? I took the city to court. This city spent tens of thousands of dollars, much more than my 2 weeks' pay, to defend Mr. McCall's unjust actions. My time is up, but
Thank you.
okay.
I'm up next.
Kartik?
I give my time to City Wu.
Okay. Thank you. So that was a cliffhanger. Okay. Are you going to start to? Okay. So the cliffhanger. I took the city to court. This city spent tens of thousands of dollars, much more than my 2 weeks' pay, to defend Mr. McCall's unjust actions. But the court ruled in my favor. Quoting from the judge's decision, the suspension was based on an erroneous set of facts and placed plaintiff in an unjustified and vulnerable position. Accordingly, the 2-week suspension without pay was unjustified. The last chance agreement also seemed like an overreaction based on what actually occurred. So, was Mr. McCall's behavior about petty city politics? Was this racially motivated? I know that the city of Sammamish did not put white male employees on suspension or a last chance agreement when they had actually committed violations. I'm requesting a public apology from Mr. McCall to both me and my former colleague. This city manager drove out 2 women of color public servants who honorably served this community. This was the team that worked closely with the Snoqualmie Indian tribe on the COVID mass vaccination site, which won the King County Executive's Community Resilience Award. This was the team that was responsible for the city of Sammamish celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month across its communication channels, creating a declaration for council for the very first time. This was the team that launched the Hate Has No Place in Sammamish campaign. I'd like to remind you that I am also a constituent of yours. I am holding you to the same standard of ethical conduct that I expect from my government. This public comment and the complaint my colleague and I wrote about Mr. McCall are being emailed to the City Council and the Sammamish Independent. I am also including my declaration charging Sarah Howe Kimsey and Kate Lansdorf with perjury, the cease and desist letter I sent to Jason Ritchie, and the most recent request I sent to the Sammamish Independent to correct their articles, none of which have been responded to despite writing them repeatedly for over a year and a half. To public servants everywhere who are going through so much these days, don't let yourselves be bullied. To women of color and to those bullies in social media who call us unqualified and undeserving of our jobs, use your voice to tell the facts, speak the truth, and stand your ground and hold power to account, like I am doing now and will continue to do. Madam Mayor, this council stood silently by while Mr. McCall attacked your communications team for no good reason. I respectfully ask that you put this request for a public apology to me and my former colleague as an agenda item for you to discuss and vote on. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Rick and Shelley Seiler.
Rich Seiler, longtime Sammamish resident, 32 years. I've done some development in the town, so I know that there's costs that come with development and things of this nature. However, now that we're retired, we're getting tax fatigue and curious as to why this new appliance or whatever tax is going to come up there, that utility tax, why we have to keep getting taxed when our property taxes seem to go up almost every year. And it's just becoming very difficult in pushing out senior citizens like ourselves out of this beautiful city of Sammamish. So I'd like to know why we continue to be taxed on things that are, we seem, already in place, and I've already paid for them over the years. I've paid my utility tax, put my sewer in, and we continue to get further and further taxed. So I'd like to know why, and I'm sure a lot of other senior citizens would like to know why we continue to get taxed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment in the room? And if not, we'll go to online.
Per the reasonable accommodation, those who have pre-registered to give public comment, please raise your hand.
Good evening. It's Mary Wichter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to speak about the item on the Central Washington University site. I've been speaking now as of St. Patrick's Day 2015 for almost 10 years at meetings. I do hear a lot of things. I did attend, I believe, all the meetings when the Central Washington site was being looked at, being rented to them. So what I remember, I didn't look up data. I did look at King County Parcel Viewer today. The Central Washington site there is between East Lake High School and sort of the stormwater area backs up to East Side Catholic, which is the private high school that goes down. But they're pretty connected through walking through. I don't know if there's a pathway there. But as I recall, the city had been able to purchase that building and the numbers of acres for about $6.1 million, and I believe it's valued at about $12 million. So it was a really good thing to buy, and they weren't sure what they were going to do with it, and it really made sense for Central Washington to try it out. So that was all signed, I believe, in 2017, and I know that the stormwater was done pretty well for it because there used to be flooding downstream under the road, which there isn't that much anymore. I also know that it looks like there's low impact development coming off the roof with the gravels, but a lot of times that runs into the parking lot. But I did learn that, speaking with the Central Washington people years ago, that the grassy area in front of it where the parking lots aren't, that had actually been compacted and compressed so that a second building could easily be built on it. And I believe if we were going to get a park and ride as part of the ST3, that for $20 million or something, that was one of the sites that was going to be considered. I know that Microsoft, I believe, has a thing where they pick up people, so that's kind of a park and ride there. It's just a really unique location. It's a good building. It was Mars Hill Church when it was bought over. It's still listed as a church religious on King County, but it just seems to be a really great location. So I'm hoping that something can be done with it. Also, my kids went to Lake Washington School District schools, and in order to play an orchestra or be part of the Performing Arts Center at East Lake is really, really used. Like the Sammamish Symphony couldn't even hardly book into it to come play, although I did hear them there a couple times. So it's got a really nice gym. I think I saw one of the open houses from the city. There's not a lot of places that have an indoor gym, so I'm hoping like maybe the YMCA and extra classes or multiple sports things would be able to use it, or I just don't know what the uses are, but it's just a really great property. I'm sorry that Central Washington is not continuing their 5-year renewals, and I hope that you will extend to June instead of just March for this evening so they can finish with the students they have. So I just wanted to give you that history. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I'll promote the next caller.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is Heather Murphy-Rains. I'm a 20-year resident of Sammamish. First, I'd like to support Celia Wu. I think she deserves apology. Secondly, I would like to address tax fatigue in Sammamish. I think so many in Sammamish are experiencing tax fatigue. Many on fixed income, senior retirees, elderly, and renters are being taxed out of their homes. I might be more amenable to this if I didn't know that this council moved $5 million from parks to town center incentives to buy land back from the out-of-state developer. And our city council took fiscal responsibility at the cost of another $6 million for us to build a road the builder was originally responsible for. You add that up, that's $11 million, just about what this utility will bring in. Meanwhile, we're paying, I think, $250,000 for a study to see if we can make our town center more profitable for the developer, and all to add 4,000 housing units to it. So then we will have to pay to widen roads, increase water sewer capacity, make further bonds, levies for schools. Also, our current kids will be bussed off the plateau to make room for these new residents. Let's not forget costs we will need to reconfigure fire trucks, since we don't have ladder trucks to reach 10 stories, much less up to the 15-story massive towers you guys are considering. And then we'll have to pay to retrain firefighters. And yes, we'll have to pay for more services like police too. All this is a spending problem. Please, city council members, spend within your means, or better yet, spend within your constituents' means. All of us residents are living within ours, and there are rough times ahead with the current economy. It's time to tighten our belts. This tax is so regressive, and it taxes our most vulnerable, fixed income seniors and lower income renters when they can least afford it. Stop with the endless studies and the developer carrots and incentives that cost us money. Please really start cutting the fat out before you start a tax like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move to our next public comment. Mr. Stickney.
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Appreciate all the public comment today and the opportunity to chat. This is a bit extemporaneous. I remember Mary 10 years ago when she first spoke. I'd been coming about a year or two earlier, since the fall of 2013, to work on the comprehensive plan, which was what I call the second comp plan. And I remember Mary getting to know me over a few weeks, but she was still concerned. You're a real estate agent. She was in environmentalist, and we just talked about things. And one thing I'll never forget is when I explained to her what I define is the difference between housing affordability and affordable housing. That affordable housing is typically what needs a subsidy or from 30 to 80% AMI. But housing affordability is housing available typically at 30%-ish of one's income for all income levels. And to several speakers that have spoken over the years, interviews I've done at city council meetings, and I don't mean interviews in that way, just, chatting with people. There really is a major need or citywide housing imbalance on market rate houses and different and diverse and smaller units between 500 and 1.4, as well as some high-end condominiums and townhomes. We have a real good oversupply. And about 2 years ago or so, I talked to the Planning Commission, and I mentioned the Doors song 5-1. I think that really is the ratio, but I'm altering it to 4-1 to be conservative. Don't have time to go into all the factors behind this. I'll just share a conclusion and would be happy to share all the factors with you. But roughly speaking, different, diverse, and smaller housing units of market rate and affordable, what I call A, B, and C housing, 4 of those units have the equivalent effect of roughly 1 detached single-family home when it comes to traffic. Most of the other metrics have much less effect than that. And contrary to what some feel, I don't think the numbers are the issue. I think the effects of the type of housing and where it goes, mostly in centers, take pressure off neighborhoods, and mostly round out market rate housing and do inclusionary affordable, have our cake and eat it too in A, B, and C housing. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Thank you.
And that's all for online public comment.
Okay, then I will be looking for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So we have moved now to public hearings. We are continuing our public hearing and adoption implementing a 6% utility tax and use tax on brokered natural gas. So we are expecting a presentation here from Rachel and Vicky. Thank you very much.
I'll wait till we get the presentation pulled up. Almost there.
Give me 1 second, sorry. Introduction.
All right, I think we're ready to go. So good evening. For the record, Vicki Carlson, Finance Director. So tonight is hopefully the final night for the public hearing for the utility tax legislation. Go to the next slide. So we are here tonight because the city general fund budget is structurally imbalanced, meaning that ongoing revenues are not paying for ongoing expenditures. The lines officially crossed this year. We knew this point was coming. It is not new information. Total budgeted use of existing fund balance in the general fund for this biennium is approximately $14.3 million, with approximately $6.4 million being used to pay for ongoing expenditures. The rest is for one-time capital needs. We need to find new ways to pay for existing levels of service or reduce or eliminate our level of services in order to stay within our existing revenue sources. Back in 2022, Council provided direction to maintain levels of service and hold staff harmless. This was taken into consideration when the budget for the current biennium was drafted. In response to the structural imbalance that was identified, a community task force was pulled together and they validated that the imbalance does exist. After reviewing the city's financial situation and a variety of ways to address the structural imbalance, the task force identified a solid path forward and presented the recommended approach to Council back in 2023. The recommendation was for a three-phased approach. City staff implemented the first phase by reducing the general fund budget by about $8.9 million. The second phase, which requires council action, is to implement the utility tax, and the third phase was voter action with the recommended approach of a metropolitan park district. These three phases together are needed for fiscal sustainability and to maintain the same levels of service. So this slide is where we are today. It shows ongoing revenues compared to ongoing expenditures, and you can see the lines have crossed this year. As I mentioned earlier, we are budgeted to use about $6.4 million in existing fund balance to pay for ongoing expenditures. It's not a best practice to use one-time funds to pay for ongoing expenditures, nor is it sustainable. Per Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, which is a national organization for government finance professionals, recommends that governments maintain a structurally balanced budget where ongoing revenues are sufficient to cover ongoing expenditures. So one way or another, we need to take action now.
So you've seen this slide before, and you all know very well all of the services that the city provides, but we just wanted to take a minute to review that again. So again, these are services that we provide in-house here. So your community development, all of your permitting, your code enforcement, everything to do with building or adding onto your home. Parks and recreation, we know that is very important to this community. So not only all the beautiful parks and trails that we own and maintain, but all of the amazing events that our colleagues put on, the lifeguards, different facilities and that sort of thing. Public Works is something that we touch every day, right? We wake up in the morning and Public Works is in our lives, right? So that's your streets, your roads, street sweeping, snow and ice. And then we have all the internal services, so the stuff that's sort of done less in front of the public, but that makes all of the other stuff move forward. This next slide provides a snapshot of our contracted services, which are also very important and are also very expensive. As we know, police and fire are some of our highest costs in the city. And then we also contract for our court and criminal justice services, which we are required by law to have those services. Are there any questions about contracts? I think one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing in this presentation today is providing opportunity. We're not rushing through things, and we're making sure that there are questions that are answered. So anything that we've covered to date?
Any clarifying questions from council?
So Vicki mentioned this briefly, but just a reminder about the task force, right? And a reminder not only of the 10 community members who graciously offered us their time and their expertise as we went through this, but looking at all of the various strategies that they did look at, which is on the one side of that slide. They told us very clearly that they wanted us to, that they believed that maintaining level of service to the fullest extent was what was needed in this community. And that was validated later on in the 2024 statistically valid community survey that we did, where the community really said, hey, we really like our services, right? We like the cleanliness, our parks and recreations, those are higher than comparative communities, same with street repair, safety, stormwater, and just the overall places. Sammamish is a place to live. So that was why the task force made the recommendations that they did of that three-legged stool that Vicki walked through.
Okay, you have seen this slide before. This is the three-phased approach to address the structural imbalance that was recommended by the task force. Step one was for the city to reduce expenditures in the general fund before raising new revenue. The task force said reduce $1 million over 3 years starting in 2025, and we've reduced the budget $8.9 million, which goes well beyond the task force recommendation. The second phase is the implementation of a utility tax starting next year. And the first two phases alone will not solve the structural imbalance. That's why a third phase is necessary, and that's the voter-approved measure for the Metropolitan Park District. Okay, so the cost-saving measures that were applied to all departments, they're listed on this slide. What-ifs and contingencies reductions were part of both the 2024 mid-biennium adjustment and part of the reductions for the current biennium. We've reduced the total number of seasonal positions. We've restricted and reduced training budgets. We've reduced office supplies and meals expense. We have limited overtime for those positions that are overtime eligible. And we also added and then increased the vacancy savings for both staff positions that are vacant throughout the year and the police contract. And we do continue to look for cost-saving measures. An example is cell phones. So this chart shows the budget reductions if it had not been done. That's the red dotted line. Our general fund expenditure budget would be about $4.5 million higher on an annual basis, and our budget gap would be substantially larger. Looking at the projections for 2020-30, if we had not reduced the budget, our projected gap between ongoing revenues and ongoing expenditures would be over $20 million. And I do want to point out that this graph shows what this would look like if we maintained the same level of service and did not add additional revenue sources.
I'm going to pause again, see if there's any questions.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, just this is more to clarify for the public, but can you just address, like, it's a straight line, and so you've applied an increase. Can you just explain what that is and why, so that people understand that we're not like adding a bunch of things to the budget?
Sure. This is based on the exact same level of service we have in today, and based on assumptions for expenditure growth as well as revenue growth. The bottom line is the revenue growth, and you see that as a very small increase, and it's because 62% approximately of our general fund revenues comes from property taxes, which is restricted to 1% growth plus new construction, which is very, very minimal. Again, with that being 62% of our budget, most of our revenue budget goes up very minimally. The other revenue sources that we have in place do not have significant increases, as they're typically tied to the economy or what's going on. An example, we had to reduce interest rates or interest rate projections because we had a couple years where interest rates were going up significantly, and our interest earnings are starting to decline, not only because of the reduction in interest rates, but also because our fund balance is going down. So all of that has been built into the projection for the revenues. The expenditures also have the same kind of assumptions built into it. Salaries and benefits being part of our larger part of our budget. You may remember that salaries increases per contractual obligation is a 4-year rolling average. So we had a few years of very high inflation. So we have that 4-year rolling average. Those are all built into the expenditure budget. And then a moderate increase going forward, because again, we don't know 5-10 years from now what that's going to be. We have to make some assumptions. We have a 5% increase built in for both police and fire. As we saw for the 2026 budget, 5% may be too low. But when you look over time, 5% is a reasonable amount to estimate for those kinds of cost increases with those two contracts. The rest of the expenditures are increasing. I think it's a 3% increase. Again, we have to pay for inflationary increases just like everybody else does. That affects our budget. So that's why you see expenditures increasing more rapidly than our existing revenue sources.
Sure. And then if I may just clarify. So again, a 5% increase is for just sort of normal inflation. And that 4-year rolling average that you referred to as the CPIW, which is an inflation index for salaries that our employees and most of our contract employees are tied to. I will say the Eastside Fire and Rescue does not have a 4-year rolling average. The city does. The 4-year rolling average is much better. It smooths it out so that you don't have those sudden shocks to the system. It's also better for your employees because it smooths out the effects for them as well. So I appreciate that. And then just to clarify for the public, when we talk about the 1% increase, property taxes are different than other taxes, right? When we talk about a 1% on, say, sales tax, that's 1% of, that's the rate. But when we talk about a 1% increase in property taxes, it's a levy. And so what that means is if our total property tax revenue in a given year was $1 million and we wanted to increase that by 1%, we're not increasing your rate by 1%, we're increasing the levy by 1%. And then that levy gets spread out across all of the properties around the city based on assessed value. So if you look at your property tax rate over time, when your home value goes up, your property taxes, at least the city portion, is not necessarily going up commensurate with that. As a matter of fact, your property tax rate would actually go down if your home value is going up because we're limited to the total revenue that can go up. And so I just wanted to clarify that for people because honestly, I didn't know that until I ran for council, right? It's not how normal taxes are applied. So thank you for that.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
On your previous slide, there was bullet point, what ifs and contingencies were removed. And in a lot of the contracts that we see, it's typically 10%. And so from here on out, we won't be seeing that anymore. And is the goal just to get super tight on how we're budgeting and making sure that we're only budgeting exactly what we need?
So those what ifs and contingencies were more department related. So what if we had a really big storm? Let's budget for a really big storm instead of budgeting for a normal storm type of a thing. You will continue to see contingencies on construction projects coming through, right? And planning projects because that's a best practice for that bullet specifically. We were talking more about overall philosophical budgeting within a department. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. Will you be covering just as far as the tax revenue per capita Sammamish and peers? Will you be covering that in your presentation?
We will be getting
to
that shortly. Thank you. So this is another slide that you've seen before, and this is a consolidation of some slides that were given to the task force and that you all also reviewed at your retreat. And so the city has sort of 4 buckets of services, right? We are legally required to provide some services. In fact, the function that Amber is providing today is a legal requirement for a city in Washington State to have a city clerk, right? We also have ones that are legally required, but you can toggle the level of service, right? And then there's some that are functionally required. If you have a staff, you have to have a payroll person. You have to have somehow they have to be paid, right? If you have facilities, they have to be maintained. Those are functional requirements. And then we have what's in the blue box here, which are highly valued services that are not at all required, right? In this green box next to you are some of those required services that have an adjustable level of service, right? We can move things up and down on those. The reality is that unless we are moving forward with a different revenue, in all likelihood, services in the blue box would need to be greatly reduced or eliminated, and some of the services in the green box would need to also be dialed down. Again, to Vicki's point earlier, it is best practice. The Government Finance Officers Association and everyone else you have the same amount of your revenues cover your expenses on an ongoing basis, right? Right now we're living off of our savings account. So are there any questions about this slide?
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, because it says that we would be required to eliminate. I think the reality is it's a best practice that we would have to cut spending. We do have money in savings. It is not recommended that we live off our savings account. And again, to clarify, 2025 is the first year that we actually expect that we will dip into our savings account. In previous years, we actually haven't. The budget anticipated that we would, but that's because our budget had a lot of fluff in it and we never actually spent as much as we budgeted for. And generally, our revenues were higher than anticipated. So just to clarify, I think we have a lot of people who are very eager. We will have to cut services. It doesn't mean we will necessarily have to cut full-time staff. And there's no law that says that. We would have to cut things when we ran out of savings, so to speak. And we don't want to get to that point. So thanks.
Councilmember Gupta.
Yeah, thank you. This really stood out to me because I know we're talking about, well, what if we don't raise revenue? What if we just cut back? And the scale of cuts that we're talking about, eliminating everything in the blue box. This is not easy, but I hope our community takes a look at this and really considers what it would be like if Sammamish stopped doing all of the stuff in the blue box or significantly reduced. And on top of that, had to choose additional cuts in the green box. I think, to me, that would be incredibly challenging going forward, especially given the data that we had on how much our community does value the services that the city provides.
I think it's important to note that the services in the blue box do not add up to the gap that we have. So we would have, in my professional opinion, we would have to go into the green box as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so this slide you've seen before. This is the original estimate that we've been talking about for the last several meetings and as well as last year. This estimate is based on Mercer Island, and it is a per capita calculation. Because we don't have data points to do a more refined calculation, and this estimate using the utility tax based on Mercer and doing a comparable per capita, it is a valid way of estimating revenue when you don't have other data points. This is a very common way of doing it. Most professional organizations, if you don't have data points, will do the per capita calculation. The next slide has some updated information. So this slide is very busy, but I'm going to try and walk you through it as best I can. It does have updated projections using the same methodology that was used by Baker Tilly, which was how the calculations were done on the previous slide. The methodology that was used to project the utility tax, again, it's comparing per capita based on Mercer Island's information per capita, then compared to Sammamish's. So we know, I'm going to focus on the left-hand column, which is natural gas and electric. And I do want to point out that this is how Mercer Island captures the data. They don't break out natural gas from electric. They combine it in their information. They also combine water, sewer, and stormwater. So we have to do the same calculations to mirror in order to back into the per capita. So looking at the left-hand column, we know Mercer Island's utility tax rate as well as their 2024 actual revenues. We did get that information recently. That's why we were able to update this slide. We used the Mercer Island's tax rate of 6% divided by the utility tax actuals of 1.9 million to determine the gross revenue from the utility providers. We then take the gross revenue from that calculation to determine the tax revenue of 1% for Mercer Island. We have to do that because they don't have 6% across the board like we're suggesting. Then we take that 1% tax revenue that was calculated that I just mentioned, divide by their population, and their population happens to be 25,830, to arrive at the Mercer Island per capita amount for each 1% of tax revenue, which equals $12.75. The idea is that each person, not household, but each person in Mercer Island pays $12.75 annually for the natural gas and utility tax. The rate of $12.75 is then applied to Sammamish's population, which is just over $68,000 for the 1% tax. We had a question coming in of what a 4% tax be, so we provided 1%, 4%, and 6%. So if the utility tax is 1%, the far right column would generate $1.9 million. A utility tax at 4%, just under $7.7 million. And based on the updated information for Mercer Island, using the per capita methodology, Sammamish tax at 6% would generate about $11.5 million. That's the second to bottom line. We have updated information in a couple of areas, and that's the two boxes in red. That's the cable tax and the water, sewer, and storm. So for the cable tax, we have a franchise fee already in place. It's a 5% fee based on gross revenue. The budget for that revenue source in 2026 is $580,000. So 5% generates $580,000. We can calculate 6% would generate about $696,000. That's based on our existing budget. We also received an email from Sammamish Plateau yesterday showing us how much a 1% utility tax would generate based on how they thought we might define gross revenues. So their assumption shows $327,000 for each 1% of utility tax. 6% of that would generate just under $2 million. Now, the trick with this one is Sammamish Plateau does not cover the entire city, right? We have Northeast Sammamish up here. And so we have to figure out how much of the city is represented by Sammamish Plateau and how much is represented by Northeast Sammamish. And if we use data from Sammamish Plateau, we can make an estimate based on assumptions for the Northeast Sammamish utility, and that estimate comes out to about $654,000. So those two calculations together is about $2.6 million for water and sewer. Then we can add $750,000 for the storm tax, which again, we know that because it's our own utility. We know what our budgeted revenues is. That projection comes out to about $750,000. That's how we arrive at the revised budget of $3.36 million. It is complex, but I wanted to walk you through those calculations to kind of show you how we arrived at that using updated data. And so with these updated numbers across the board, the total projection for utility tax is actually 10.6 based on this new information we received yesterday.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Well, my question was not really about the slide. It's just about another part of our budget. Is that okay? I just wanted to kind of bring our attention to a large part of a budget is paying for police and fire and rescue. And generate and maintaining that particular level of service that we've come to expect. What percentage of our budget is fire and rescue and police service combined?
Sure, combined it's about 37% for 2025.
And what could you hazard a guess at what kind of an increase we've seen in that particular, those two line items over this budget period?
Yeah, I had that number before. I want to say police went up about 6%, fire went up about 15% for 2025.
Okay, and I think for the two, maybe even fire and rescue went up even more. Would be more like a 20%.
Fire was about, well, it started out originally as a 23% increase, and they made some reductions over what they had originally estimated, so it came down to a 15% increase for 2025, and I'm blanking on what the increase was.
Another 8. I believe it's another 8 for the following year. So combined, it's...
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you so much.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thanks for these numbers. Do the water, sewer, and stormwater, do those include the rate increases that will go into effect as of January 2026?
They do not. They are based on 2024 actuals because unfortunately there's other variables in this particular calculation, right? Weather has a calculation, consumption as consumption varies. The email we received from Sandwich Plateau, just as an example, they said that their usage was about 10% less in 2024 than prior years because there was a rainier season. So it's difficult to just add in a rate increase and assume that the revenue is going to increase by the same amount.
Okay, is that true also like for gas and electric? Like we know that the PSE rates are going to go up quite a bit and they went up from 2024 to 2025 and 2025 to 2026. I think electricity from 25 to 26 is going up 11.5% alone, and it's I think 1.7% for 2024. Gas was 1.67 in 2024 and 6.7 in 2025.
Right, but the problem is we don't know consumption, and that's kind of a key piece to try and do that calculation.
I will just add, though, that in your year over year, you're assuming a 3% increase.
We are assuming a 3% increase.
That some of that growth is built into the model.
I also, for the police and fire, just over a 10-year period, because the fire went up a lot this last year because it didn't go up at all for several years. But over a 10-year period, they've each gone up. I think fire went up about 45% and police went up almost 50% over a 10-year period. And those are services that we're not going to skimp on, right? That's public safety. That's job number one. And the last time we did do like a police services study, contracting our police services through King County was way less expensive than if we had our own police department. And if you look at the comparables for Eastside Fire and Rescue in terms of the per capita costs, we are the lowest in the entire maybe state, but I don't think I can say region. I don't know that I can say the whole state, but it is significantly lower for that. So even though the costs are going up, I think that's just sort of normal costs of doing business. And so I just wanted to share that I don't think Eastside Fire and Rescue has a problem per se. It's that we kept the rates from going up for several years, which we probably should not have, just as an FYI. So thanks.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
So if we approve an utility tax, say at 4%, it is implemented in 2026, and if we see that it's not enough, is there a lag time between upping that percentage? Like, say we wanted to go at the end of the year to 6%, is that an immediate, can that happen immediately, or is there like a lag time?
There would be a process, just like that. You would have to do a new ordinance. There would have to be a public hearing. You would have to give, I can't remember how, there is a period of time you have to give the utilities. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I want to say it's 120 days.
It's a few months.
But, right. So you could not do anything immediately. And I will just add that 4% will not be enough.
Right. Okay.
And I also wanted to say, too, that 6% is not enough. As I mentioned earlier, the recommendation is really three-step approaches, right? It's staff doing reductions, which we've done. Utility tax is the second step. And even if we had a higher utility tax, it would not be enough. We have to have that third voter approved in order to truly achieve financial sustainability, because the utility tax gets us financial sustainability for 2 to 3 years. That's it. And then we flip back upside down again. And the revenue at the 6% that we would generate the first couple of years would then be set aside to get us to the voter-approved Metropolitan Park District. And the earliest we could get to a vote would be 2028. And depending on the timing of that vote, if it happens in the last half of the year, the MPD would not actually start collecting taxes until 2030 because of the timing to get to the county to get the levy in place. So we have to bridge that gap until at least 2030, and that's if the stars align. We get to the vote in 2028, the vote is positive, and we start collecting revenue in 2030.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as it relates back to police and fire. With fire, we were in the unique position of being on the board ourselves and having some oversight and capability with the FAC, for example, to negotiate, to try to see what we can do to reduce our expenses. I don't believe we have that kind of authority or control with police contracts. Could I get some help there?
So the city manager sits on, they call it an oversight committee. I think the city manager is probably the best to answer that question.
There we go. Thank you, Mayor. So we are on a contract that we signed collectively about how the costs are allocated, and it's just depending on how much of the service, if you will, that we purchase. But the costs are set collectively, and then we are just buying what we want out of that model. So for all of the cities that contract with King County, we're all part of the same interlocal agreement that has a cost structure built into it. So it's not just the city deciding they want to, amend those pieces. It would have to be part of a group ILA, if you will, discussion. And a lot of the county's costs are set in salaries, that contract salary increases that are in place as part of contracts.
Thank you. Councilmember Gupta.
Yeah, sorry, just for the benefit of the community, the FAC is the Financial Advisory Committee for Eastside Fire and Rescue, and an ILA is an intra-local agreement.
Thanks. That's good.
That's my job. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, so again, you've seen this graph before. I did update this to the new projections. So instead of showing $11 million in 2026, it's the 10.6. It really makes no real difference for the graph, but you can see, again, we're upside down this year. The utility tax at 6% would start in 2026. We would be right-sized for 2.5 years, and then we flip upside down again. And as I just mentioned, the reason we're suggesting the 6% is because we do need to have that buffer to get into the out years for the MPD. And again, if the stars align, if we get to the voters in 2028, if the vote is positive, if the MPD starts generating revenue in 2030, otherwise we're upside down and we're back to having to make the same decisions. So again, this is the legislation that's in front of you tonight for decision. Utility tax starting January 1st, 2026, covering the utilities at 6%. It does include a low-income rebate program at $100 for qualifying households. The legislation included for brokered natural gas, just that ensures that all gas delivery is taxed at the 6%. It doesn't exclude certain gas deliveries being non-taxable. And we do have administrative rules that need to be adopted by council prior to the end of the year. And we hope to have those to you before the break in August.
So just as a reminder, that we have been talking about this with the community for quite a while. I'm very pleased to see we have a constituent who walked in with their Sammamish newsletter here this evening, because we did a big article about this, wanting to make sure that we were very transparent about this work. So these are just the touches that we have done over this past almost year and a half.
Councilmember Treen.
Thank you, Mayor. If you don't mind, if you go back 2 slides, one more. So ongoing, the heading here is ongoing revenues versus ongoing expenditures. So when I look at this graph, we're showing that there's an increase every year of the budget. So, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so here's where my challenge, I have a challenge. This isn't the first time I said this, but the idea was the task force was asked the city to reduce the city's budget by 1 million over 3 years. Based on this slide right here, that has not been accomplished. So, unless, because even in the whereases of this draft bill, it talks about that there is a reduction of 8.9 million in general fund budget reductions. So I'm looking at this as, this slide is showing me there's no reductions, that is just going up, ongoing revenues, ongoing expenditures. And the proposed draft ordinance says that we've actually met requirement number 1 of the task force, which was to reduce the city's budget by 1 million over 3 years, which they believe that would be a very difficult task. Looking at these numbers, I'm going to tell you that's a really difficult task, because you went from 57 to 62 to 65 to 69. So it's always going up. I don't see anywhere in a 3-year period of time where there's a reduction of the budget by $1 million. And until I see that, then I'm having a real hard time then as a council member to go back to the public and say, okay, now I'm going to raise your taxes by 6%.
So if I could, 22 through 2024 is actuals, not budget. If this graph had been prepared showing budget to budget and not actuals, you would have seen the budget for 23 and 2024 much higher, so you would see a dip. The new budget in 2025 has those reductions already baked into it, and so the increase that you're seeing is based on the new budget that does have growth built into it, right? We have increases for staff, per personnel, per contractual obligations. We have increases for police and fire. So yes, the budget is growing over time, but it's based on the new lower budget after the reductions have already been made.
So to actually reduce the budget by $1 million over 3 years, taking into the projections of the growth in the cost, how would you actually do that so that it would show a decrease over 3 years of $1 million?
Again, it's not going to show a complete decrease. It's based on the new budget that already has the reductions built into it. That's the new starting point with basic inflationary increases built into it after that.
And I get that. So I'm going to go to Scott and ask a question here from our city manager then, because I'm really not getting a satisfied answer yet. And that's no hit on the finance director. Is the reason why the increase is here, and the only way then to show the $1 million decrease over 3 years would be that we would have, see, I think I know the answer, but we would have to change the level of services, or reducing staff, or by cutting services, or changing what we're doing as far as contingency, or is it project based? So there's a lot of different avenues, complexities to this, that where monies can be drawn out to compensate for the increases in cost of the outgoing expenditures.
Thank you, Councilmember Trine. I think one of the things that I want to clarify a little bit is I think we need to be clear on what our definitions are, because I think that will be helpful. Because when the task force recommendations was to reduce the budget, that means that we cut dollars out of the budget. And I asked the team to go back to the slide that you see in front of you, because for me it's orange. I don't know why, but whatever that top dashed line is, that's where we would have been if we hadn't gone through and taken reductions in the budget. So while what Vicki is saying is we're still going to grow with inflation over time, there's no way to get around that without year over year reducing to meet inflation every year. And to date, I think that would be really challenging to do, because in effect, you'd have to look longer term than that and say, what can we not afford to do? And each year you would do that, you would have to say, well, we've got to cut something because inflation exists in all of our contracts as well as our personnel costs. So what is reflective here is the red or orange line, whichever you want to say, at the top, the dashed line, that's what it would have been if we hadn't gone through the 2 budget rounds of reducing costs, which is reducing the budget. At least that is my definition. And that's what we took out of the task force. You're not seeing it on the other slide because the blue line in the middle is where we are today moving forward. The orange line would, again, or red would have been what we would have been moving forward if we hadn't taken those reductions. So I appreciate your point. I just want to clarify the definition, because maybe you have a different one that we can talk about, but that's how we defined it at the staff level, and that's how we've been operating, is reducing costs by 8.9 million over time is reducing the budget. You'll recall that this year's budget over last year's, the budget went up less than 1% overall. And that was because we went through and did a lot of reductions. As Vicki said, we baked them into what we brought to council for consideration. But the year over year increase was less than 1%. And that was by design to try to get at the reductions that would make this even viable to have this conversation. We knew we couldn't come to you with this conversation until we had done a lot of hard work that you all, I think, are supportive of and want us to continue to do more of this, and we will be.
Thank you.
Sorry. These next couple of slides are new. I know that the ones that we've just been through are stuff that you've seen, but I know that this was some of the requests that you all had from the last meeting. There was a question about how many staff does the city of Sammamish have compared to our other cities on a per capita basis. As you can see, we are very lean here at the city of Sammamish. So the other question was about specifically the general fund budget expenditures compared to our peer cities. Again, doing this on a population basis, we have a significantly less general fund expenditures per capita than our peer cities do.
And I just want to point out, this is 2023 data because cities are still working to close out 2024. So this is the latest consistent data we could get across all cities.
Are there any questions about those?
Rachel, if you would back up one slide and just clarify that when it says citywide FTEs and we're excluding enterprise, that means stormwater staff are not included. That's why that number looks a little lower than you might think, because they're paid for through the stormwater utility and they're not general fund FTEs.
Yep. And we also wanted to exclude police and fire to make sure that we were looking at apples to apples.
So another question that came up is just what our mix of revenues are. So the chart on the left shows our 2025, 2026 budgeted revenues, and it shows the major categories and what percent is for each one of them. So you can see that the property tax is 63.1%, That is our largest revenue source. The next biggest revenue source is sales tax at 13.3%, and on down. Those are our major categories of revenue. If we add in the utility tax starting in 2026 at 6%, it does start to shift the makeup of our revenue. So instead of 63% of our budget being property tax, it drops down to 58% or just a little lower. And it also reduction of sales tax. Utility tax would then be the third largest revenue source. I do want to point out, though, that this is slightly skewed because the utility tax doesn't start until 2026, so it's half the biennium. Starting in 2027, you would see an even bigger shift, so a little less reliant on property taxes, which again is restricted to the 1% growth. So this starts to diversify our revenue source and diversify how our different revenue sources can be projected. And with this, I'm going to turn it, unless there's other clarifying questions, I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor for the recommended, staff recommends adopting the ordinance, implementing a 6% utility tax and a 6% use tax on brokered natural gas.
Thank you, Councilmember Rashid.
Thank you. I just had a quick question about sales tax, and is it trending in this biennium where sales tax is that revenue that we're generating? Is it picking up or is it continuing to decrease?
It's flatlining right now. I haven't looked at it the last few months because we've been working on closing out the years, but you may recall when the pandemic hit, sales tax increased significantly, and that was because of the shift to more online purchasing, but it's flatlining at this point.
Online purchasing, our city, because you get the sales tax from the destination.
Correct. It is destination-based sales tax. So if you go to a mall outside of Sammamish and you buy your product there, wherever that mall is, that's where they get the sales tax. If you are at home and you have something shipped into your home address, then Sammamish gets the sales tax. It is absolutely destination-based.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there more clarifying questions? If not, I have one. At times we hear from the public that the city has purchased a street for $6 million and that that we've already purchased land in town center for maybe another $6 million. And then there was the bomb cyclone, and that's $3.2 million. So there's a lot of numbers floating out there that actually aren't anchored to reality in terms of what's going on. Maybe you could help kind of define for us just what things have actually happened. I mean, I could start with just saying that the road for 6 that's a 3-phase project and $2 million was approved.
Right. I was just going to say that we have a very detailed citywide CIP for the first time, right? So, and I will take a cue from Councilmember Gupta and say that that's a capital improvement program. And so within that document, right, are all of the projects are laid out. All of our capital projects are laid out there. And so you are correct, Mayor, that one for 6 is a 3-phase project, but you have not allocated or okayed all of the funds for all 3 phases of that. So similarly, there is a dollars set aside for the purchase of a town square in alignment with the town center plan that this community has had since 2008. You have not, however, signed a purchase or authorized the city manager to sign a purchase and sale agreement. So I would encourage people to look at both the budget document and the capital improvement program document, because we are trying to make things as transparent as possible. But ultimately, you all still have to provide the city manager the direction to implement those projects on a project-by-project basis.
Okay, thank you. So, let's see.
No.
Oh. Councilmember Gupta? Sorry.
Yeah, and to my understanding, neither of those projects are drawing from the general fund. Is that correct?
That is correct. With one exception.
Council will recall that the dollars allotted for the town square reside in the park CIP fund balance. They are allocated within the fund balance in the park CIP. And those are not general fund dollars. at the moment. They were originally, I want to be clear about that, but they are not at this moment. They are sit in the park CIP.
Great, thank you. And just to my understanding, those parks capital dollars, a lot of the money that goes into that is restricted. It is encumbered. For example, park impact fees, that's a fee that a developer will pay when they build new housing units. There's a rate for single-family homes. There's a separate rate for multifamily homes. That goes into the CIP and can only be used for parks capital projects that expand the capacity of our park system. They cannot be used for maintenance or operations. Even if we were to not do a project if we were to pull something out of the CIP, I don't think we could use those to bridge our shortfall. And I think it's worth noting again that a single project is not the same as addressing an ongoing revenue imbalance. So I know it's not easy and this is complex, but I think that is worth keeping in mind.
Mr. City Manager, do we move to public comment now to finish? Yes, great. So if I could get the public comment for the public hearing on the utility tax, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Tom Hess. Yes. Yep, you come right up there.
I did get one of my answers already. What was the, because I was looking at this article again. I'm here because my wife's constantly complaining about increased taxes. But that we have that blue thing. The one thing that was not good about the presentation, there was no dollars as relationship to a household paying a tax. Was there anything in there saying, this is what it's going to mean to you? Also, and that's kind of big because all you're showing is percentages. And I've dealt with budgets for years for major corporations, so that's the first game that people play. The second one is there's an assumption about the percentage increase across on the inflation rate. Now we have things going on in the federal government. We're probably going to have something going on in the state government because now they have a $15 billion surplus. I bet you anything, if I look at those numbers, it's probably labor. Labor in some way or another because of what happened over the last 4 years that went through the roof. I know because I had to try to get my house painted, and every bid. The funny thing about the bids were, oh, but you live in Sammamish, there's a new price. So if you were over in Renton, it'd have been half the price. Kind of a crazy thing since it's the same people painting it. So I didn't see those numbers, and that's kind of the most important things to a household. The second thing, based on the things you're picking, what's slipping through the cracks? Like who's actually paying utility tax? I already heard there's a $100 potential rebate for some people. How many people is that? How many people are we subsidizing up here besides me? Not directly from Seattle though, see a city of C. It's my pension plan through my company. So I guess that kind of bothered me. There is no like, this is what it means to you. Well, $500, people are going to say anything. $5,000, the basically what it looks like we're going to get back from the federal government if they continue their path is just going to go to my city. And that's only one of the two places that's going to be looking for a handout. The thing that also surprised me on the state level was the little advertisements running on TV almost every night now about what are we going to do different in this state to drive down these costs. And it was the first time last night I caught some of the companies that were complaining about it. One of them was Microsoft. And they're probably the biggest reason right now why we're dealing with this problem, because labor went up. I know what happened in the IT industry, and it was almost crazy based on before we even started contracting, bringing outside contractors in, bringing worldwide contractors in, prices went through the roof. And it was almost like you couldn't do anything about it anymore. That's like the new rates. So I do appreciate the time. I learned a lot in this meeting. That was nice. I didn't like the fact that it's not very flexible. Everything is so tight, you can't just go around and adjust it either. Like once you go down this path, what I really fear was the blue box. When you go out and you ask people and you say, well, what would you like to have in your community? There was no numbers next to those. Not one number.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off
Oh, I'm
there.
sorry. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, dang it.
It's at 3 minutes.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. Did you get my last comment?
I can't.
Oh.
It's council rules. But check after.
You might want to give me their time.
Actually, we have Debbie Treen up next.
Thank you, Council. Debbie Treen, a Sammamish resident since 2010. I have a couple, the first thing I have to say is a little bit nitpicky, but it actually really bugs me, and that is in the whereases for this particular motion. There's a statement that says, oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to pull it up. It's the fourth paragraph, and it basically says that the task force, of which I was a member, validated these assumptions upon which the expenses were based. And I don't recall validating those. Those were given to us by the consultant. The only actual action we took was to evaluate the various sources of revenue that we could add and decide and prioritize those over which ones would be the most feasible and desirable and solve the problem versus those that aren't worth trying to do. So I would like to strike the phrase in that whereas that says we validated the expenses, because we didn't do that. Also, of course, all of them have changed now anyway. We have updated numbers, so we haven't validated anything at this point. My other comments have to do, forgive me while I pull up my notes. I wondered, there were two other things that we did not evaluate. One was the impact of the town center development on our future operating budget. And, you know, there are those in the community who say it's going to solve our problem, and there's those in the community who say, oh my God, we can't afford to pay for the police and fire it's going to cost. And so we're really putting this in place without really knowing or even having specifically evaluated that particular item to see if we really need that money or not. And I realize even at the fastest pace, the town center is not going to get built in 3 years. But I do feel like saddling the public with 6% utility tax when we don't even know if we really need it in the long run is maybe acting a little quickly. And that also addresses back to, I have one other idea on the concept of only looking at recurring revenue when you're dealing with recurring expense. That's totally best practice. I agree, totally best practice. But in a city, when you see in that chart that was shown that we have things that are actually not required for us to do, this may be a question more for the finance director, but would it not be potentially appropriate to use non-recurring funds to address those items that are not required to be funded by the city, and maybe be able to make adjustments by addressing those differently? So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments in the room?
I didn't realize there was a second sheet.
I know, it's confusing. It's confusing. Absolutely. You have 3 minutes. Remind me your name, I'm sorry.
Rich Seiler, I'm on the other sheet as well. Well, this has been a very, very interesting meeting, and I apologize for not attending more, and I intend to do more in the future because it is very informative. So first of all, I'd like to show some gratitude for your efforts, because it is important that we have a city that's run well, and sometimes you don't get enough thanks for what you do, so thank you. Did elicit a lot of questions about what's going on. Previous comment was about the per capita cost. I think that's really critical for everyone to know. And I've got some general questions that, excuse my ignorance, are probably somewhere in the publication somewhere that we can share with the general public, and it's out there. So is there a push for electric versus gas? I mean, PGE is always pushing us to switch over to electric. So I'm just going to list a bunch of questions that can be answered somewhere in the future, because it'll take too long to answer the questions here. And I'd like to know about that, because PGE is pushing this big electric push, and I like gas. It's cheaper. It's a lot better utilization, and we should be pushing for gas. Secondly, how does the council know what each individual pays for their gas and electric? How many of you have access to that? And do 100% of the property taxes for the city of Sammamish go to the council here? Do they go to our city, or do they go to part of King County, things of that nature? I'd like to know about that. And all the different, I guess another question would be all those things in the blue box about what each individual 6% goes towards. How do you know what each individual pays on those particular accounts? I'd like to know what that is. How do you have access to that and how it's going to be charged? And let's see, one more question here. Let's see, what is it? Oh, the savings account. I didn't realize that we even had a savings account. Does the city manager control that? How is it managed? Is there a financial guru that's behind it that actually invests the savings account? And if so, is there a way to actually manage it and where it actually grows with the projections of what the city needs? I think that's really important. I mean, here's an individual, I've got to manage my budget at my household, and I make sure that we have enough money to cover household costs now and in the future, which includes this meeting about future taxation. So I'd like to know if that's in the public record somewhere, and we can maybe look at that and see if that could be adjusted somehow or invested, whatever, so that we can maintain the city as it is and for future projections. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have online commenters?
We do. Per the reasonable accommodation, those who have pre-registered to give public comment online, please raise your hand if you'd like to give comment. Tom, when you're ready. It looks like you're muted, Tom.
Okay, I'm Tom Harmon, and I'm a commissioner of Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District. I'm at 4369 243rd Avenue in Sammamish, and here I am trying to fit a 1-hour presentation into 3 minutes, so I'll do the best that I can. What I'm here to talk about is the water sewer bill, which has 4 elements. The first element is local water. Mary Richter talked a little bit about that at the last public meeting. So the biggest thing is we're building a new tank, and we've increased it by 2 million gallons because of the fires in California and Maui. At least if 2 or 3 houses catch fire, we'd have enough water to take care of that. And then the other thing is our PFAS plant. Now the costs of those elements, probably we're in engineering now, but the construction costs won't happen until 27, and that's when things will start going up. The second element is local sewer, which we use to run the district, and those that are on septic tanks don't have to pay that. Now the third element is what I'm going to talk most about, and that's King County. You know, King County treats all of our sewage, and that's the biggest amount on a water sewer bill. And what it's talking about, and this is the thing to keep in mind, is they're planning a 7% increase for next year, which will be passed at our MUPAC meeting, which is Metropolitan Water Pollution Abatement Advisory Committee, which I'm a part of. So that'll get passed next week for 26. The district in element 1, 1 and 2 is probably about a 5% increase. We're trying to keep the increases down if the 6% hits to at least help our ratepayers a little bit. Let's see. Okay. The thing with the county, and I got to be real fast, is it's a 12 to 15% increase happening in 27. That's going to be when it's going to hit the fan, that and the utility tax and everything. That's when somebody will notice that the water bill is really going up and so forth. So, but you know, they're not going to call you when this happens. They're going to call us. But either way, what I'd like to do is certainly keep the utility tax down a little bit, like Northeast Sammamish's letter, and at least phase it out over time. But keep in mind, don't come back next year and say we're going to add 3% to it.
I'm sorry, Tom, I have to cut you off there.
Okay, that's about all I have to say, so best of luck. Okay.
I'll promote our next online commenter. Heather, whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is Heather Murphy-Raines. I really feel you have not drilled down this data sufficiently. Due diligence has not been done. Basing this on Mercer Island rather than partnering with our utilities that have the data seems short-sighted. I don't understand why you haven't worked with the utilities and actually using Sammamish data. Our home sizes and our energy consumption may be quite different than Mercer Island. I know our temperatures get quite lower than Mercer Island. And then also in a previous council meeting, a former water district employee said that water bills, and actually the previous guy that talked said the same thing, that may actually double in the next 3 to 5 years here in Sammamish. She was talking about double-digit increases year over year, and you've not taken that into account. You mentioned 3% worked into your budget. We're talking 10%, 12%. I also question these $8.9 million in cuts. My understanding is that they really are just not filling already open positioned, unfilled positions. So these really aren't true cuts. I'd like to see you guys actually making true cuts. So before we feel the pain, you guys should actually work on your budget and feel some of the pain before we are taking account for your actions. And again, these taxes are truly regressive and are coming at the worst possible time for your constituents. It's a death of 1,000 cuts for your constituents. So please, as public servants, serve your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll promote the next online public commenter. Mary, when you're ready.
Hello, this is Mary Wichter. I've been in Sammamish for 24, almost 25 years. I did want to say that I think for the utility tax, we just really don't have any other alternatives at this time. The thing I remember that Vicki Carlson, the finance director, had said a number of meetings ago, excuse me, is that many other cities actually do collect this type of tax on utilities to supplement their revenues. In fact, she gave like 180 out of 200 something. I know it was more than 50%. I don't know if as many as 2/3 of them. I know Issaquah was doing a 3% utilities tax on water and sewer, and they've increased that to 6% for this next year. So it's really not out of a line to do, but it is going to impact people individually. And you've heard from a number of people about being older or being on fixed income or how much is it going to be. And just having the city give back $100 to lower income, you're not even saying what those are. I think it's very important that the city would do a communications on the main website that would let people know what levels of people that can qualify for any sort of rebate. And then like Puget Sound Energy has a special thing. Sammamish Plateau and Water District also has a special thing. And the problem is the people that really need to hear that information often are the people that don't hear about it. And if there's any gateway to getting into it, sometimes they can't get the paperwork done due to language or other type of things, maybe even disabilities. So I think it's really important that the city would spend some time making sure that all those are listed if you go forward with the sales tax. And then I wanted to speak to my email that I sent today, because the city's structural imbalance can't really be achieved through more taxation and increased taxes. And it's been stated that the utility tax isn't enough, and that Sammamish being 85% single family homes, the homes cost too much for all the services that we have, and you're not going to get more revenue from the city. So what I sent in is something from online. It's the math that suburbia is subsidized and why American cities are going broke. And then there's 3-dimensional graphs that are done by Urban 3, where they look at all the costs for a city, and they show that the upper gray ones above the city, that those are the revenues, and then they show the lower red ones, which are the cost to the city. And they show you that town centers and center areas, and particularly even mixed use areas, that those, instead of doing suburbia and growing outwards and having dead end cul-de-sacs and sprawling more, that you can actually achieve a great revenue. And they actually put in there, they have 3 graphs from 2013, 16, and 2019 from a city saying this is what a solvent city looks like. So it's really, we're seeing, it's only just 10 minutes long. It's probably worth watching twice. And it'll also be related to some of the discussions you're going to have on April 1st, no fooling, because I believe Town Center is coming again. So those are the things that I can say. And I hope that you'll read my email and watch that video. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary.
All right, we have one more public comment online. Paul, whenever you're ready.
Hello, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Appreciate the chance to speak. I'd like to start with comments by Councilmember Treen and Heather Murphy Rains. I agree, and I've asked on the 8.9 million, I'd like to simplify. How much of that 8.9 million is unspent that could have been spent that was not, as opposed to money that was spent and is actually cut? That's the first thing I'd like to ask. Second thing, I'd like to read my conclusion of my 2-page public comment with links that I turned in today. My conclusion was enact a utility tax in the 3 to 5% range as quickly as possible, add appropriate market rate target numbers for B and C housing, which is mostly under 1.5 million, but it's market rate, to be actualized alongside A in the current comprehensive plan, which is affordable housing. And then as the revenues from A, B, and C are realized, adjust and lower the taxes. I've been very transparent for all my civic involvement over all these years. And tying back to my first comment today, I've been advocating that we add 5,000 market rate houses, B and C, to the comp plan along with the 2,000 affordable housing. But those 7,000 units will only be about a third of the growth our community has seen from 1999 to 2024, and the equivalent of about 1,700 houses. And that's without a transit. With transit, those numbers will drop. I turned in several factors today that aren't exact fact, but they absolutely show trends. And there's been a major shift in the last 14 years with spending up, revenues down, reserves down, and taxes up. There's very little room to pivot. And I mentioned many topics that aren't even addressed in all this, and that matters. And now I think I'm going to turn a little bit to some housing numbers I've been assembling recently. From 2012 through 2021, there were 2,259 houses built in Sammamish, single family mostly. That's 226 a year. How many single-family homes in 22 and 2023? 50 a year, 100. That's gone way down because of development regs phase 1 and 2. In multifamily, in town center for 6 years, 0. In the rest of Sammamish, 40. We're way deficient on market rate housing from 500 to $1.4 million. It's time to actualize that. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Paul.
That's all for public comment.
Thank you. With that, I will close the public hearing. I'm going to gavel because I get to now. So there we go. So I'm very gavelled. And it is time to deliberate on what we're going to do here. So council, who's first? It looks like we've got a taker with Councilmember Stewart.
I want to clarify something. I think I created some confusion, and I'd like to clear that up. So we don't technically have a savings account. We have the general fund has a balance in it. So just, there's been a lot of comments about our fiscal behavior and whether we're fiscally responsible. Our city has no debt. And I don't know that there's another city in the state of Washington that has no debt. So I just want to throw that out there. So in terms of like, hey, we have to live within our means, right? I think we all take that to heart. So we have no debt. We do have a general fund balance. And so I refer to that as the savings account because it's kind of a comparable thing. And so we currently do have a $55 million balance in the general fund. Now, part of that is a reserve because it's only responsible as a city that we have a reserve fund should there be some major catastrophe or a sudden downturn in something. We don't want to have to suddenly be getting rid of all the emergency staff that we all need in said emergency. So part of that is part of that reserve. So we do have that general fund balance. And I will say we do have a financial guru who manages that, Vicky, who's sitting right here. And so yes, that money is invested and earning interest and earning money. And I think last year, or over the last, was it last year or the last biennium, I think we brought in somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 million in earnings on that general fund balance. So we do try really hard to be responsible, just like we do run our households, that we keep money in the savings account just in case. But there's a balance, right, of when do you spend that savings and when do you keep it so that you're earning money and you have it for those emergencies. So I wanted to clear that up. Just to throw out a couple of other numbers since there were questions. So on a $1.5 million home, the property tax, or 1%, the property tax rate on a $1.5 million home right now in Sammamish is $1,665 a year. So that's what you would pay. So you can adjust based on what your home value is. On average, based on our estimates, the average home in Sammamish would pay about $500 a year in utility tax. If we bring in 11 million, we have about 22,000 households. So just some quick math there. So it would be on average $500 per household. Again, that's going to vary widely based on the size of your home and the usage that you have. So if you live in a really big home, you'll obviously pay a lot more. And if you live more modestly, you'll pay less than that. The other question that came up was, do we have access to PSE's bills? No, we don't. If only we had that data, we could have a more accurate estimate. And then there was a question of, for that 1% that we go up, how much of that comes to the city versus someone else? That 1%, and again, that's a 1% total levy lid lift, that would come to the city. But there are documents out there that show, I think, in your total property tax bill, I think only about 12% comes to the city.
It's about 15% depending on what school district.
Okay, sorry. I was so close. Thank you. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share all that out. I think that normally we don't respond to all the questions, but this is such an important topic. I wanted folks to know. Yeah, sorry, Scott is not our financial guru. It is Vicky. I'm sorry, Scott.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
I was going to address the question to the gentleman that asked about how much this would affect him, but I think he's back. So okay. You asked the question, how is this going to affect you? So we did have a slide, which we did see during the council retreat, and I see Vicki or Rachel nodding her head that she can pull that up, right? So while she's pulling it up, I believe the average household will be paying $300 to $600 to $900, depending on usage. And we are offering a rebate. And to qualify for that rebate, you would just need to qualify for one of two things, either the PSE HELP, which is the lower income program that PSE offers, or the senior discount for property taxes. I did look for PSE HELP. The maximum yearly income is for a household of two is $88,800, and for a household of four, it's $111,000. So, I mean, that is, it would help a lot of people, I think. And then for the senior discount, again, it's age 61, you own your own home, and the household income max is $89,000. And I think, oh, sorry, I can't take your question. But I do believe that Mary Wichter, who was giving public comment, is that there are probably more people that qualify for these programs that may not be aware, and we do plan on doing a community outreach to make sure everybody that qualifies knows that there is additional help that they can receive. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Speak to that, Rachel.
I just brought up the slide that was referenced. You saw this slide again at your retreat, but it just provides an idea of how much a 6% utility tax could impact a household. Again, because it is tied to usage, right? It's going to be very different for all of us, depending on your house size and even just lifestyle, right?
Are there other questions or deliberation from council at this point? I would be interested in seeing if someone would like to give a motion, make a motion.
I can do it once it's back up. Oh yeah, awesome.
Okay, that would be great.
All right, I move to adopt ordinance O-2025-580, implementing a 6% utility tax and a 6% use tax on brokered natural gas.
Would you like to speak to your motion? Oh, excuse me, sorry. I do need a second.
Second.
Thank you.
No.
Now would you like to speak?
No.
Actually, I would like to speak to that. So, we understand that any tax increase feels like a horrific burden. We also recognize that many residents are feeling stressed by the uncertainty that we are all facing right now. That's why we've kept this public hearing open for a month, to be transparent, to share data, and most importantly, to hear your voices. This is not a city government versus resident scenario. This is our shared challenge as a community. We all want our city to thrive, and we're working together to ensure its long-term health. A couple of key points. First, cities are not businesses. We provide essential services, not products. Some are invisible until something goes wrong, like an icy street during a storm or a pothole after winter. Others are more visible, like safe sidewalks, working traffic signals, and well-maintained roads. Behind the scenes, our professionals are also helping residents, get their legal ADUs built and ensuring responsible development, something that aligns with the character and nature of the city. A business might choose to close a fire station to save money, but we can't. We have to maintain public safety and quality of life for everyone on an equitable basis for the common good. Second, this is not a result of mismanagement. The structural imbalance has been known for over a decade. Prior councils chose not to implement a utility tax, even though most other cities did. And while that decision saved us money in the short term, personally, as someone who has lived over 35 years, the time has come to address it responsibly. Third, we've already made the tough choices. We've made tough choices cutting $8.9 million from the budget. We've also asked for your input from residents through a statistically sound survey to prioritize the services that you value the most, the things that make Sammamish, Sammamish. In short, while we are guided by sound fiscal principles, we are also driven by our duty to this community. We are working to ensure revenues will sustain services that we can all rely on for our safety and quality of life. Ultimately, this is about securing a stable, safe, and vibrant future together. We are in this together to make sure our city stays strong for years to come. Deputy Mayor Lamb.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to make an amendment. I move to amend this ordinance to increase the annual low-income rebate from $100 to $200.
Second.
It's been first and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah. I understand that this is going to be, this is a very financially challenging time for a lot of people. And with this, I hope to make this tax as less regressive as possible. And I encourage everybody who can qualify for PSE help or the senior discount exemption on property tax to do so, because between those programs, which will lower your bills, and the and the $200 rebate, like I sincerely hope that this, for anybody that is lower income or on a fixed income, that this will help.
Councilmember Stewart, are you speaking to the amendment?
I am now. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lamb. That was one of my big questions. Until we have some real data, I felt like the $100 just wasn't enough for those who are on a fixed income. I know that one of the biggest challenges in Sammamish is if you've lived here a really long time, you probably bought your house when it was an order of magnitude less expensive. And so now some of these expenses really hit hard. So what I would challenge the council to do is that, and the staff, is that as we start to collect data and we start to get any amount of, a few months worth of data, to really look at what these amounts are that are hitting people. And I would encourage the public to be sharing with us so that we can make the appropriate adjustments. If 200 isn't enough, this is a policy decision. We can change it whenever we need to based on data. So right now we're making best estimates, and as soon as we have better data, we can make more accurate and more precise decisions. So I appreciate the amendment, and I hope that we'll continue to hear from the folks in the room as we get started down this path. Thanks.
Councilmember Gupta, are you speaking to the amendment?
Yes. I just had a clarifying question for staff, maybe. So from my understanding, the way that the PSE help works in conjunction with the utility tax is residents who qualify would pay a reduced rate and then would then pay a consequently reduced rate. They would be paying the utility tax on that reduced amount, and then this rebate would apply to that reduced amount. Is that correct?
The rebate would apply to all utilities. We chose PSE help because it's a relatively low barrier entry. What Deputy Mayor Lamb said about it has a fairly high income threshold, I want to be clear, right? But it also has a very low barrier to get into, right? And then same with the King County property tax exemption. And so if a community member just brought us proof that they are enrolled in either one of those programs, which is very easy to do, then they would automatically get the rebate. One of the things that we really wanted to do is make this a low barrier to actually receive the rebate. And so I've been in cities before where you had to itemize and bring in tax returns and all. That's that's too much work, right? So we tried to make this very low barrier. So yes, people who are on PSC help are already paying a lower rate to begin with. But again, the now potentially $200 would cover all utilities, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Clark, are you speaking to the amendment or calling the question?
Yeah, I mean, a question about the amendment. I didn't know if you had talked to staff before. Okay, so this is like something that is doable, and is it like, we'll look at it a biannual basis? I'm kind of confused.
It would be on an annual basis.
Okay.
So a community member would come in, right? They would
to change the number, if we're changing it to 200.
It would just be 200 moving forward.
Forever.
Potentially.
Until we change it.
Until there needs to be a change. The ordinance actually has in front of you that for $100, and then it is up to the finance director after the $100. That's just a administration thing. We would obviously come back to you if we were going to change that rate. So the amendment on the table is for $200 in perpetuity.
Okay, and we are good.
We're okay with that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So, council, we can vote on the amendment now. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So this is now amended to I don't have it in front of me. Let's see.
The other motion.
The other motion, which is the implementing the 6% utility tax and use tax on brokered natural gas. All those in favor?
No.
No, wait, what? Sorry. Councilmember Stewart.
Sorry, I didn't have a chance to speak to the main motion because an amendment was made. So I just want to share, and I can tell you that staff, I'm surprised they're even still speaking to me because I've submitted so many questions. Because I've struggled with this. I've struggled a lot with it. One, because we have to estimate and we don't have better data. Two, because it is a bit of a regressive tax. And three, just because, increasing taxes is really hard. And so this has been a really challenging struggle for me personally on how to proceed. But I think there are a couple of factors. One is that we have this program, so people who, if it hits them the hardest, so we can take the most regressive part away, so the people who are struggling the most. And again, if you don't make that threshold and you still think you're struggling, that's when you can reach back out to us, right? You don't have to just complain about things. Come reach out to us, help us come up with solutions. We're very open to that. The other part of this is that, there's a lot of discussion, and one, I just want to be clear, this tax is not tied to the town center or something like that. However, I will say that for those who are saying, don't tax us and don't do the town center, one of the reasons that we struggle as a suburban city is because when you see that chart of where our revenues come from, we don't have a lot of revenues. We have taxes. Other cities actually have revenues. And we don't have a lot of that. So trying to find a balance to increase those revenues through sales tax and other means is important for us because it is otherwise not sustainable. And I think Mary Wichter brought up a great point as well, which is the costs per capita on infrastructure, on how our city is currently evolved, is incredibly high. We have over 750 cul-de-sacs. Cul-de-sacs are really expensive to maintain. There's a lot of street miles to get to a cul-de-sac, right? And things like that. So we are being as responsible as we can be, and we are trying to chart the most responsible path forward that we possibly can to bring down those per capita costs as we go forward, to create housing for our children and for seniors who might want to downsize but not leave a community that they lived in for decades. I think we're trying to do all of those things all at once. So I've struggled with this, but I don't see another path forward. And I think if we can continue to monitor those who are, in the lower income brackets or who are being hit the hardest, to make the appropriate adjustments and monitor how much revenue we actually bring in. Again, it's not like we want to change it all the time, but we have the ability to do that if it suddenly comes in very different than what we were expecting. So I just wanted to share all that with the public and to reassure you that we hear you and we're doing our best. And again, the fact that we have no debt and that our per capita taxes and our per capita costs are lower than almost any city around, especially on the east side and in this area, I think that's a testament to our staff and to this council in terms of our fiscal responsibility. Thanks.
Any other comments? If not, then let's vote. All those in favor of the amended adoption of implementing a 6% utility tax and use tax on brokered natural gas, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 6-1.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going on to unfinished business, or rather new business. So the Central Washington University lease extension. And I don't know who's up. Is that you, City Manager? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. As you will have seen in the packet, this is a pretty straightforward lease extension. This is a very short-term extension of the lease through the end of June. In a lot of ongoing conversations with Central Washington, they finally let on that they financially can't continue to provide services. It's just not financially feasible for them anymore. And so their second 5-year lease extension would have been up this month, and they would have had to sign up for another 5 years. For a little bit of context, excuse me, the original lease was signed in 2017. It was a 3-year lease agreement, which was essentially a lease purchase option. And after that initial 3-year term, there were the options to extend a further 15 years in 5-year increments. They exercised the first option that was through this year of 2025 in March this month. However, the rent goes up either by $60,000 or $120,000 a year as part of the lease agreement, and that was to incentivize purchase. This year, the lease would have gone up to $420,000, and that was just not something, even with subleases, that Central could continue to manage. And so they've been a great partner here in town, and we are sorry to leave them go, but also understand that everyone is struggling with financial challenges right at the moment. So this lease extension is a shared partnership that we want them to finish out the term and be there. We hope to be able to partner with them in the future. Excuse me, if things change down the road, I think that would be amazing. But in the meantime, the city will be taking the lease back over as of July 1st of this year. And at that point, some time between now and then, staff will come back to council for a broader conversation and get some direction on how to proceed with that facility, and recognizing some of the costs and potentials that would go with that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions from council.
Council, any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion to extend the lease if that's what we need to do.
Second?
I didn't. But
I thought you motioned.
I move that we provide a short-term lease extension to Central Washington University through the end of June.
Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
I just want to say I appreciate the staff and I appreciate Central Washington University trying to make this work. I am very sad to see them go. I'm really glad that we can work out so they can get through the end of the school year, and hopefully they'll be able to continue their online program for the students in our high schools here in the city.
I'll just throw in that I've been personally assaulted by many residents that have said, please, 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 I have 10 ideas for this center. So you're going to get a lot of help with all of the wild and wonderful ideas about how this is going to benefit the city. I realize it's also potentially hit to the budget because it's not something we'd anticipated taking over, absolutely, so we're going to have to figure that part out as well. So nothing's ever easy. But I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the city as well. If there's no other comments, Then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go to council reports and city manager reports. I believe we'll start with Councilmember Gupta. If you could walk us through proposed King County Parks levy from your PIC agenda.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to apologize again to council for the tight turnaround here. My understanding is there was a challenge from SCA, Sound City Association's side on getting the agenda out. I think that has been resolved, so we'll get some more runway in future months. At our PIC meeting last week, Public Issues Committee meeting, sorry, we had significant discussion among the member cities about the King County Parks levy. There were concern. So I guess just some background. The Parks levy is set to renew in August of this year. It's a 6-year levy. There were concerns from member cities about the size of the levy. It is going from an existing rate of $19.54 per $1,000 of assessed value to a proposed rate of $24.43 per $1,000 of assessed property value. That's about 3% of the average property tax bill. Under the proposed allocation, direct money coming to Sammamish would go from $2.14 million to $3.92 million. Concerns from member cities were the overall size of the levy might contribute to tax fatigue and what the plan was should the levy fail, because the King County Park system operates, it requires the levy funding to operate. So there's concern about what Plan B is should the levy not go through. So I think you had the presentation that we received in your packets. My understanding is PIC will be deciding whether or not to hold a special meeting to take action and take a position, which they will then use to inform the King County Council as they make their decision in April. So I wanted to give council an opportunity to provide feedback if there are any questions or concerns.
Sorry, Councilmember Stewart.
Do we know that that's a 25% increase? Do we know what, like big brush strokes, what is increasing it by 25%?
Yeah, I think there is a breakdown in the packet.
I felt like it didn't really explain that well.
It sort of talked
About
about
what
the
the
equity
increases are.
stuff being, frankly, a big chunk of it to provide more services to more people is what it appeared.
And yes, equity, the pass-through dollars to cities are increasing. I think there's the current methodology is a minimum of $25,000 plus some breakdown between population and assessed property value. My understanding is there's a difference in the formula in split, but there's also an increase in the minimum dollars allocated to 100,000. So every municipality will be getting minimum $100,000. So the pass-through amount has increased, and I think the broadest brush stroke that we got was increasing. Let's see if I wrote that down. Focus on building capacity to maintain the existing system. So I think there's a lot of operations dollars that are going into that.
Other comments from council? Deputy Mayor Lamb.
So this levy is huge. It's $1.5 billion. This is substantial, but understand that it is only, we're already paying this levy. We're already paying, what is it, $815 million. So it's an additional, it's actually, they're doubling it. But at the same time, I very much value our park system. We have the East Lake Sammamish Trail, that is a King County Parks, that's part of King County Park system. That connects to Marymore Park, which is also a King County Park. And so I understand this is a huge tax increase, and I do believe, though, it is too much. We've just spent the last hour and a half talking about taxes, and I think everybody does feel the pain right now. So I would like them to lower the levy to what we're currently paying and inflation. I don't want this to be a situation where it's all or nothing, because if they move forward with $1.5 billion, they risk not getting any of it. So I think the prudent thing to do is to lower it and just account for inflation and to ensure that our parks do stay open. I mean, we all know what's happening federally with our national parks, and certainly we want to maintain our state parks and our King County parks, and hopefully our parks in Sammamish.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Lamb that that's the direction that we should take with the PIC committee. Thank you.
I'm seeing general agreement that we're all slightly horrified by that number and would love to see something different.
All right, great. I have direction from council. Thank you very much.
Okay. Make sure you add the slightly horrified part, because it's a punch, right? Okay. With that, we will be going into executive session to discuss with legal counsel potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110 paren 1I. Approximate duration will be 10 minutes.
Can we add 5 for a break to that?
What? Can we do it in 5? Is that your
5-minute break?
Can we add a 5-minute break to that?
I was going to say, Mayor, I believe there's one other council report that Councilmember Farrell was going to make. If we want to come back, if we want to come back afterwards, we can do it then, or you can do them. We can do it now.
I have it. Just do it now. Just do it now. Okay. Wait. Okay. I'm reasonable. Okay.
Just very brief, I have a RIA 8 meeting on Thursday, and I just sent a brief synopsis of our previous meeting to you guys. And so we'll just get a brief update on Thursday as to where state legislatures are, where the RIA are following various legislations moving through both houses. So we'll get some kind of an update on where the legislation is right now. They're really pushing to see some new improvements at the Ballard locks and protecting our salmon coming through there, through all the various predation that they experience along the way. So I shall have an update on where that's all. I'll get that on Thursday. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
I almost forgot. We had our Eastside Transportation meeting, and I think the big news out of that is our bus service is about to improve. And so I'm hoping Councilmember Gupta, I couldn't pull it up fast enough, knows exactly when that's happening, but we're going to get more frequency of service and weekends back, right? So that's super exciting.
I believe it's March 24th. It is end of March in anticipation of the Mary Moore Light Rail Station opening in May.
Deputy Mayor Lamb.
I have a Board of Health meeting on Thursday, and I sent out the agenda with the topics. And one of the main topics is the King County Hazardous Waste Management Program. And my favorite topic, it is talking about rate increases. Thank you.
And I have a flood control meeting as well as a regional transit committee meeting this week too. And it appears that the city manager also has something he would like to add.
Mayor, for a very brief city manager update, I want to, along the lines of transit, we found out from Sound Transit that May 10th, Saturday, is the grand opening of the Redmond Downtown Extension, which includes the Marymore Village Station as well. So there'll be more to come on that, but want to make sure everybody joins us down at the celebration will be at downtown Redmond at that station, and then you'll be able to, once the event kicks in, then they'll start running the trains, and you'll be able to jump on and ride. At this point, all the way down to the South Bellevue Park and ride for now, but that will be exciting for our community to actually have access to that line. So,
Really good news. Okay, now we are going to do an executive session. As stated earlier, I will add 5 minutes for a break, so it'll be 15 minutes from now that we will return. I am not expecting action on this. So we will be returning at, I don't have a watch. 8:53. Thank you. And we're back. And I believe I would take unless there's any other council reports that I inadvertently missed. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Moved to seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.